Didn't know,
Extra special then.
didn't know you could handle so much.
Oh
Great.
god.
Is Steve coming?
Brownie sends his apologies.
Of course.
Where's Trent to record?
It's Trent's job. It's the one job he's got.
He's attending to First Officer YouTube.
With the gas mask.
Don't get me going.
I'd record the channel, but my internet will probably drop out 14 times during the meeting.
Alright, we're not getting a lot of people joining just on 8 o'clock on the dot, apart from me, so we might make a start.
Is anyone recording?
Tom, you just nominated yourself.
Yeah.
Why are there thingies next to Sam?
Now Trent.
Okay.
Sam's recording.
Cheers, Sam.
User entered your channel.
Ready, set, go.
Alright, so welcome everyone to this town hall. I think we actually had one earlier in the year, and the intention is that moving forward that we'd run probably 2 of these a year, just to keep the community up to date as to what we're doing, and obviously to get feedback from the community as to what they want to see in the future. So a bit from me, obviously we've had quite a number of changes in the past month or so. So in case you're not already aware, Alan's appointed me as acting division director for the time being. Operations, Greg's kindly agreed to step in to fill that spot for the moment, and we are currently taking applications for the permanent role. So if you're interested and you haven't already put in your application, please do so. You've got until, I think, the day World Flight starts to get that in. And we would expect to have that position filled by the end of the year. ATC training, Dan's obviously doing a great job with all of that. We've got no issues with ATC training. IT, Brownie has agreed to step in and fill that spot for the time being, and we will look to reappoint that in the next 6 to 12 months, say. Obviously, sooner the better, particularly with Brownie's real-world commitments. And in events, we are currently going through the process of selecting a candidate. So one of the priorities for me at the moment is, obviously we've had quite a few difficulties in the past sort of 14, 16 months. They're not all entirely related, but they are sort of intermingled. So obviously we had the issues at the regional level last year. Those are no longer an issue, but obviously we had some issues late in August into early September. And to me it seems like the board needs to listen to the community, and we need to be a bit more open and transparent about the things that we do. And so that's what this discussion around governance that we're going to have is all about. I'll pass over to Greg. If Greg, you wanted to say anything about what's happening in operations, even though you've only been in the role for 2 days.
Operations? Yeah, I can't say an awful lot at the moment. My primary focus is going to be getting us through World Flight for the next couple of weeks, getting that all organised and on the way. We do actually have an AREX cycle changeover during World Flight, so there will be some new sector files out during that week. There's not a lot of changes, so it shouldn't impact the event that much. But just so everyone is aware, that's on track, and actually Quigs did most of the work on that, so I've got him to thank for that. And then I'll look at some documentation changes. There's a couple of amendments that are published in the forums that I want to make into actually incorporate into the documents themselves. So I'll be working through that as well. What else do I do?
That's about it, I think. Now, obviously, so Harrison, did you want to, while Brownie's not here, give the guys a bit of an update, an idea of what IT's been up to in sort of the past 6 months?
Yeah, I guess so. So, obviously in the past 6 months, just after our last Town Hall meeting, we upgraded the server, which has brought massive performance gains to the site. Obviously, we've been working on a couple of projects, one of them being a place where we can centralize ATC training records, and also update some of our event sites, which are certainly out of date, to a newer thing. We also have the Discord bot, which unfortunately is out of commission now, but we've also got the new feedback system, which we had to bring in because we had someone exploit one of our forms previously. So that all goes through Vatsim SSO now, so we know who's submitting the form. But I think in the next probably month or so, you can expect a new Slot Mania site, which might come along with events, which I have no idea about, but I'm just delivering the site.
Alright, thanks Harrison. Dan, any news from ATC training projects?
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot really. It's good that neither of the deputy directors showed up. That's good. But they're working on some stuff as well, particularly Ryan. He's working on creating some new scenarios and stuff. I believe Joshua, is he here? No, he's not here, but he's making some stuff as well for us. So there's going to be some new tower assessments coming out soon, and a new TMA assessment, as well as a completely revamped mentoring program that will be standardized for each rating, and will mean that everyone is learning the same thing, and each of the mentors are teaching the same thing as well. We're doing a lot of stuff to create an automated training system. That's a long-term goal, since I'm pretty bad at technology. So I'll be working with the IT department in regard to that. But other than that, there's not really a whole lot. We're still training people. Got a lot of people that are going through it currently. There's currently, using my new system, there is currently 13 people that are being trained.
Alright, thanks Dan, and brief note on events. So obviously we had the Real Ops event the other weekend. Fantastic turnout on that event, so absolute credit to the guys who put that together, particularly Tristan and Sam. So fantastic turnout. I forget what the number was, but it was in the hundreds. And obviously great turnout from the controller side as well. Clearly, for the rest of the year, once we get past World Flight, there's not going to be a whole lot more that's going on. We are anticipating that we'll have a Cross the Ditch at this point. Fat NZ so far have indicated, I think, early December as a date. But obviously, there'll be more information about that as we in the coming weeks, particularly after World Flight. Alright, so we'll move on to the second item, which was around the whole governance thing, and I want to run through this fairly quickly. A lot of the nutting down into the details I've already gone through with the board and the staff, and really I just wanted to get a feeling of what the community thought of it all. So if you haven't already seen it, I'll quickly send a link to where you can get the discussion paper. So in the chat there's a link there, and within that link there's a place to download the discussion paper. So what I'm going to do is basically go through item by item, and if anyone wanted to raise any points, you're certainly welcome to do so. So I'm just going to go through everything under 3.0 discussion items. The one that to me is important, that's the membership has a think about and provides some feedback on, even more so than the rest of it, is the first one, the objectives of the organisation. So why do we exist? Why are we here in the first place? So the text that we're going for at the moment is that the objective of Vatpac is to provide a networked environment for the simulation of flight and air traffic control within Australia and the Pacific. So going back to the days of SatPac, you know, obviously the organisation was part of SatCo at the time, and obviously SatCo provided that networked environment, and following the split with IVAO, the board of SatPac at the time agreed that they were going to become part of the new VATSIM. So were there any comments on the objectives of the organisation?
Can't download the file.
Really?
Is anybody else having trouble?
Nope.
No,
but I can send it to you.
Do you have Word?
Yes.
Oh, it's a stupid question, but you know.
But it's actually telling me my account doesn't have permission to download it.
I just sent it to you, Greg.
It's a great
Thanks.
special.
I got it the first time, so I don't know what's going on.
Sometimes it logs yourself out.
Okay, got it. I'm loading it in Word now.
User disconnected from your channel.
Any comments on objectives?
Did we comment on the second bit that's been further suggested, or are we leaving that for now?
We can discuss that as well.
No, I don't need to discuss it. I mean, I've given my views on it.
Yep.
But yeah, that bit could have the potential to go on for some time as well.
Yep, so that second part, so it's been suggested by some people that the objectives should include, as well as providing a networked environment, to also provide an environment where like-minded individuals can discuss aviation and flight simulation related topics. So at the moment I'm leaning against that, but obviously that's what we're here to discuss if anyone has any comments on it.
Is this the same debate that happens quite frequently in relation to using a Vatpac service for anything other than flight simulation purposes, aka facilitating conversations that aren't related to aviation?
No, so this is specifically about aviation and flight simulation related topics. So essentially, if this was going to be adopted into the objectives, then that would give the board a mandate to necessarily provide, forums such as the forums that we have, and potentially others, Teamspeak, Discord, whatever else may be available out there now and in the future, to provide those services potentially so that people can discuss aviation and flight simulation related topics.
Yeah, so my view would be that it's certainly something that we can do. I'm not sure it's one of our objectives.
Well, I think the goal is to facilitate, all of our common interests. I mean, we're all here for one reason, aren't we? That's because we all share the same interest in aviation. So having an outlet for us to all discuss that, i.e. the forums, Teamspeak, or the Discord when that was around, on the Facebook page, they're all ways for us to communicate with each other about this common interest of us. And one of the beauties of it is the fact that we're all Australian as well. So there's people around us who we can easily find just by coming on the service.
So I guess the question is it something that is at the core of what we do, or is it an extra? Like, for example, there is a Facebook group out there that is not run by the division, but it's pretty successful in bringing people together, an environment where we can share screenshots and discuss various things. So certainly the division, the Vatpac itself, doesn't have a monopoly on providing those services. So the question is this something that's at the core of what we do?
I don't think it is at the core of what we should do, but I think it's something that should be additionally endorsed from Vatpac. So not necessarily something that, it's our core ideal, but it's something that we can add on, like you said.
Yeah, so certainly, we're not expecting to retire the forums anytime soon, clearly. And it's probably our intention that we're going to have a service like Teamspeak or Discord moving forward. But yeah, the question is whether it's something that is 100% essential, not negotiable.
No, I don't think it's necessarily needed, but it's something that is just, a nice addition. It's like how, just as an example, sprinkles is nice in ice cream. Just as an example. It's not needed, but it's liked.
Yep.
I'm kind of curious to ask what, if such a clause were to be adopted, what difference do you believe it would make to decision-making processes, if any?
I think it would. So practically,
yeah. So that's basically where I'm coming from. Is it practical?
Yeah,
what difference does it make?
Yep. So practically, it would increase the case for adopting things like Discord, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else that you can think of. But that being said, it says that we're going to provide an environment. That's not necessarily to say that the board has to necessarily provide every possible type of environment.
I think more of the question, how does that specific objective affect us? As in, it's obviously written in writing, but then how does it affect us as a community? Like, what is it to say that then Vatpac is now responsible as a part of their objective to provide those services, or is it just another black and white thing that can be brought on when people, are upset? Why aren't you providing this, or why isn't this moderated, or yeah.
Yeah, so I'd just like to point out that the clause as it's suggested is already complied with. There would be nothing that would need to change to comply with such a clause. It simply puts into black and white the requirement to provide, and let's face it, to provide the forums. That service basically complies with this clause.
So it's just something to
think you'd
state.
be hard.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you'd be hard pressed to look at that clause and really find it to be kind of binding in specific ways. Obviously, the idea of it is in addition to providing the raw service, it's simply indicating that Vatpac is to me anyway, in my reading, is simply just beyond the pure kind of practical apparatus for logging on and flying on the network. It's also kind of a bit more than that, which I think most people would agree that it kind of is anyway. As you just sort of indicated, things like the forums are kind of already part of that. So I mean, I certainly understand the thoughts that you put forward, David, but to be honest, I'm not particularly either way on it. It's kind of very much a sort of tertiary issue as far as I can see, but my own thought would simply be it's just a colour clause really to kind of indicate that Vatpac is sort of more than infrastructure.
Yep, absolutely. And anytime you're talking about objectives, it's always going to be a discussion that leans a bit philosophical.
I guess I want to ask as well, do you personally, David, think that we should have these sort of services available for people? Personally?
Yep, absolutely. And, there's good reasons why we have them.
Okay, cool.
I think another question is to, bring up there, David, is in the case that we do adopt this objective, in what instance, and obviously we've had facilitated Discord prior, and obviously the lack of moderation on that particular forum was non-existent, and obviously things that have gone down in the past that are quite severe. What's it to say? Does Vatpac really want to take on that responsibility of having another platform to moderate, including every other platform? And I think the responsibility, I don't think it's something that Vatpac really wants to take on, or I don't think that if I was even on the board or any sort of staff position, I wouldn't want to take on moderating that, considering the events that have unfolded in the last couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and certainly there's discussions ongoing about the future of Discord, and certainly we'll be looking into how we're moderating the platforms that we already have. So essentially at the moment, we've got the forums, which, have never really been a problem, and Teamspeak, and, potentially Discord in that mix. So you're right, this does potentially open up, that we have to go and, one reading of it is that we should go out and adopt other services as well. And so that comes down to, an interpretation by the board.
Yeah, I think that there's no question that these services are available. It's whether or not Vatpac needs to provide them. I mean, obviously there's an unofficial Discord going on somewhere. I've never been there, but obviously that's happened. That's fine. There's an unofficial Facebook page. That happens. That's fine. Does Vatpac really need to expand beyond what it currently provides in what David said, the forums that have never been a problem? Teamspeak, that's an extra. It's always been an extra. We could do with or without it. But there's no doubt that these sort of services provide some sense of community for people, rather than splitting everyone up into separate chat groups.
Is there any real advantage for the network for Vatpac to have Teamspeak over Discord? Because Discord's free, better sound quality, and I don't see how it's that different to TeamSpeak in terms of behavioural, like people misbehaving, like what happened before.
The main difference I see between TeamSpeak and Discord is that Discord, once you open the application, you are connected, and everybody that is also a member of any other server that you are connected to is also there and can communicate with you by text. TeamSpeak, you have to choose to go into a channel or choose to take notice of a private message. It's somewhat more segmented than Discord is. Now, I agree that Discord is a better service. It's just more difficult to control.
Maybe in that case, if you were to employ something similar to TeamSpeak moderators for Discord, rather, would that potentially work?
There were moderators, but ultimately there were people out there who weren't able to do that job because, I heard a few people who talked to me about, wanting to do something about a particular person doing something wrong, but they're scared of the repercussions that might occur from it, and so they weren't able to effectively do their job.
Okay.
Yep, and the issue of moderation is obviously something that we're looking into, particularly in the context of a potential return to Discord. But yeah, Greg raises the other point where potentially people could, people are potentially sending private messages which end up being outside of the scope of our Discord server.
But what's stopping someone from messaging another person on Facebook?
I think with Facebook you tend to have stronger controls, although I'm not that familiar with the privacy controls in Discord.
No, you can basically just right-click someone, block them,
yep,
and then you won't see their messages.
Yep, fair enough.
Easy.
I think the point is that, like, even without the Vatpac Discord, you can still private message on Discord. So, without the Discord or with the Discord, you can still use Discord to private message.
Yeah, the difference is Vatpac's not providing anything at the moment. Discord's providing that function, not Vatpac.
So if you were to do that, maybe make a clause stating that Vatpac isn't responsible for any PMs from its members or direct messages from its members.
They don't need to. They aren't. That's sort of... Yeah, there isn't really anything to get them to sign.
I think at the end of the day, and just bring it back to this, is that do we really want, or do you as a board really want to take on the responsibility of having what happened happen again? That's more to the question. I mean, we can all.
I'm not even clear still on what really happened.
I don't think it's really appropriate to be brought up.
No. I'm not asking for it to be brought up. But somewhat, I am lost to what actually happened, and I'll just go back to. If I could refer back to the VATSIM code of conduct, even that, the A1 clause doesn't say anything about where you should be when you are respectful to other members. It says that members should be at all times respectful to other members, and that's the overlying clause that everybody needs to remember, no matter where they are.
I wish somebody told me that ages ago.
Yeah, I'll bring it up again. Do you want me to describe to you the fact the hierarchy of VATSIM?
No, I want to know about this transparency thing and what happened to Tracy and all that.
So do I.
Yeah. Interesting.
But I don't think the town hall meeting somewhere. Well, maybe.
I don't think the town hall meeting is the place.
This
certainly not.
Method of transparency. Well, let's talk about what happened then.
I don't think really anyone knows, to be perfectly honest.
Exactly.
Like one or two people.
So
I mean, how do you expect it to not happen again?
when I talk
People
about
don't know.
transparency, clearly we can only change what we're doing at the divisional level. In terms of what happens higher than that, clearly we don't have much say in all of that. Certainly we could potentially be lobbying for changes, but in terms of actually making changes, we can only do that at the divisional level.
Has anyone actually heard from Tracy in the past month?
No. He hasn't been responding to emails or anything like that.
But who's this?
Tristan.
Tracy.
He was on like last week.
He's been present in the forums only in the sense of promoting World Flight. Other than that, I have not seen him.
Oh, he was here during Real Ops.
I just want to ask the question again, David, if you don't mind. Just my question is, and it's to the board or what boards here is: does Vatpac at a board level want to take on the responsibility of facilitating a service that can be misused as the way it was prior to being shut down?
Yep. So certainly, obviously, we're having that discussion internally at the moment as to whether we want to go down that road again, and certainly that is something that's high on our things that we're considering. And you would think that would apply for any other service that we might consider adopting.
Because I think at the end of the day, it's all well and good asking us what we should be adopting and what we should take on board, but at the end of the day, we're not the ones moderating it. We can use the service, we can use the responsibility as users of that service, but at the end of the day, it's you guys taking on that responsibility to moderate it. So pushing the responsibility back onto you guys, because if something was to go wrong, it's not our doing. It's,
absolutely.
the responsibility falls back on you. So I think in saying that, I don't think it should be. Personally, my personal opinion, it should not be a part of the objective. The objective of Vatpac is to provide a service for all to use within the Australian Pacific airspace. That being, forums, information, events, IT infrastructure, training. But in saying that, I think any additional services is something that I would not want to take the responsibility for, considering the events that have just happened and how they transpired and how they sort of played out. I don't think that should be something brought upon anybody stepping into a position on the board, and I think it would be more of a deterrent for anybody wanting to volunteer to take that responsibility on board.
Yep, fair enough.
I think it is also worth pointing out, of course, that certainly at one level, providing the kind of social whatever thing can be very kind of discrete from the flight sim bit, and the other bits it's not quite as clear. So obviously, like even in the forums are primarily there for NOTAMs and for discussion, but they also slide off into talking about this thing happened on the network, like how could I have done this procedure or whatever, that kind of thing. And I think by the same token, of course, providing the services of any sort, really, whether it be forums, whether it be Teamspeak for the purposes of coordination, will, by their nature, also encompass a little bit of those other aspects as well. So it's not, in whatever decisions the board ends up making or whatever thoughts that we take, I think it's also worth considering, of course, that it's not a binary. It doesn't appear to be a binary kind of distinction to make, but rather it's about looking at to what degree do we want to allow this kind of interaction as well as the purely mechanical flight sim
disconnected from your channel.
And so, like even in something like Discord you could use in a very flight sim oriented way. You only have ATC coordination channels. You have no text channels. You could do that. But of course, you would still have people, having a bit of a laugh in the channels or whatever. So it's always a question of degree to me, rather than having kind of two clearly defined columns that you can keep separate, because I don't necessarily think that's possible, and I don't think it actually happens in terms of the services we already provide.
I don't think there's an issue with providing a service such as Discord. However, previously, the problem isn't that people get out of hand. The problem is that we let it get out of hand. And unfortunately, during that last stage before the Discord was closed, we did have a small amount of people that were moderating the server, where staff were at that point where, no, I don't want to the point where things are getting completely out of hand in a channel with 4 staff members and nothing gets done, and someone files a report. I think that's where we need to be making sure that we're actually enforcing the rules, and people know that there is a Discord policy, you're there to enforce it.
You've also got to remember that like there is a bigger reach of people on the Discord, like pilot.
Absolutely.
But then, just adding to that as well, I also found during the time of Discord, there was also a lot of people off playing, 5M or whatever that other stuff is, DOJ, that sort of stuff, and still sitting in the Vatpac channel. And it's like, okay, where you need to draw the line yourself and take onus on yourself to move yourself out of flying community and put yourself into the 5M or any of those other communities that are out there.
Yeah, but were they talking about flight sim?
No, they were too busy off talking about, I'm going to go blow this place up or I'm going to go shoot this person. And it's like, well, you're in a flying community talking about that stuff. Anyway, that's a total different sidetrack.
Yeah, let's move on. As I said at the top, this could go on all night.
Yep. And I think we've got a fairly good spectrum of points of view there. Let's move on to the other ones. So I suspect we'll move through a lot of these fairly quickly. Certainly at the board level, we went through these in detail. So the first one there, about board governance, functions and powers of the board. Is there anything that anyone wanted to raise there? So a lot of this is mostly about just making it very clear that the division director shouldn't be making captain's calls, shouldn't be going over the heads of the portfolio directors, and we want to run the organisation with what you might call a committee style of governance, where the decisions, or the big decisions, are made in consultation with that committee.
I definitely think that's how it should work. Whether it has previously or not is besides the point, but having the board, as a board making decisions, obviously under the COR, Vatpac 1 has the authority, but it definitely shouldn't be something that's overstepped every 5 minutes. It does, yeah. Let's not go there.
I think this is honestly one of the best pieces of documentation that I've seen come out of Vatpac in a very long time. This pretty much promotes what and how the division was ran prior to the multitude of changeovers and handovers. And I think it really does give a community a sense of security in terms of there's not one person making the decisions. And that's what was sort of being pushed out from above, is that, there seems to be just one person overthrowing everybody else and making decisions on behalf of the community which weren't supported by the community. So I take my hat off to you, David, by putting this in black and white to basically hold everybody accountable on the board and ensure that, that it's fair. It's fair for everybody, and I think that will really, win back some respect, and also win back, people wanting to sign up and help out in the division.
Yep. So obviously we've been running, this sort of governance for a long time. As I was saying earlier, when Satco split and Satpac decided that they were going to be part of the new VATSIM, at the time, you know, that was a decision that was made, you know, not by one individual, but you know, the board discussed it and they voted on it, and that's how we got there. So I certainly can't speak for the 10 years following that, because I wasn't involved in the board. I only know that particular snippet, but certainly in the time that I've been on the board, you know, I've seen this being run better in certain times and worse in other times.
I'm not sure if this is relevant
User joined your channel.
the section that we're looking at, but what sort of captain calls can Vatpac 1 still make? Are you still supporting the idea that Vatpac 1 can basically veto any decision made by another board member, or will that still be subject to like approval from the board?
That's correct.
Correct as in first, as in you can make a captain's call?
The Code of Regulations bestows all power on the division director to make decisions that they see fit to run the day-to-day operations of the division, and absent any showing, I'm just reading now, absent any showing of abuse of discretion in the exercise of this authority, the decisions made by the head of a division within a region shall not be modified or overturned by the regional director. So the Code of Regulations makes no mention of the staff that the division director appoints, and a division director can formulate local policy to assist them in running their division. Now, that's essentially what David's doing here in enacting this governance document, basically spelling out how future divisional directors should also run the division.
Yeah, so, you know, at the end of the day, the division director still has the power to revoke, you know, so we talk about, so this discussion will end up turning into a policy. And the division director at the end of the day has the power to repeal that policy. Absent that, what we've got in there is that, you know, if the division director does need to override something, that they consult with the regional director. And that way there's still a check on that power.
Okay. Perhaps what I'm sort of saying is a little bit didn't quite get exactly what I meant by it. I meant as in, you know, sort of a local policy that regardless of what the Code of Regulations says, sure, it may say that the director can do whatever he wants without like anyone able to overturn it apart from the regional director, but shouldn't there be sort of a local policy that, you know, the division tries to aim to have sort of representative democracy in a way, as in the board still has the ability to veto a decision made, and you as Vatpac 1 sort of, you know, have the etiquette of accepting the result of that veto from the board. I just want to try and avoid sort of having a situation where the director comes in, does whatever they want, and sort of runs it like a dictatorship, which I'm sure you probably won't do that, but, you know, there may be instances of that happening, and just sort of want to get it out there that's not something that Vatpac sort of promotes.
Disconnected from your channel.
Yep. So, of course, the context in which this is all happening is not, you know, over the next 12 months while I'm here. The context of this is to establish a framework that we're going to use for, you know, perhaps the next 5 to 10 years. So certainly we'll see a few division directors in that time. So the reality is, so the idea of this is to put some measures in there to, you know, to keep good people honest. But at the end of the day, if someone comes along and they decide that that this shouldn't apply to them, the way the COR is set up, you can't prevent that. The only way you can prevent that is by the regional director deciding that he's picked the wrong person and he changes the division director.
So what do you mean by keep the right good person honest?
Well, like for example, you know, they say locks are to keep honest people out, right? They're to stop people from going, oh, what's in here? I'm going to have a look in here. It's the same thing with this. You know, it's a set of rules that we've decided that we're going to follow, and that's how we're going to make decisions. If a division director decides, actually, you know what, this is too hard, I'm going to repeal the policy, he's within his power to do so. Now, certainly, if a division director was going to do that, you know, I'd expect that there'd be a fair bit of backlash. And so having something like this in place formally, you know, discourages that sort of behaviour.
Okay.
Are you going to include a clause that sort of says that directors should at all times listen to their board, to at least make it clear black and white that the director needs to listen to their board? You know, sure, they could overturn it, but at least have something there, plain black and white paper, that if it were removed, then people would be able to see that, hey, this person is sort of being a crappy director, plain to say.
Well, what we've put in there is that certain decisions are to be made by the board rather than directly by the division director. You know, there's a list in there, and the idea is that all of those things have to be, you know, done by a vote of the board, and not by the division director deciding one day that that's going to happen.
Sorry, David. I always thought that was never the case. I mean, obviously, I haven't read all the Constitution, whatever you like, but I thought that all good corporation, well, it's not a corporation, but board of governance would follow that process.
Sorry, David, if I may jump in. It was the case in practice. It was never actually documented because it simply worked. Now, the day that someone came in and started throwing their weight around is when we were thrown into this turmoil. So this is a very important measure to try and protect us from that sort of thing happening in the future. So yes, you're right. The good governance was in place, but it wasn't via any type of regulatory framework.
Yeah, let's be clear that most of this, there are some things in here that are actually new that we're proposing, but a lot of what's in here is really just writing down, you know, those things that we've been doing for the last 2 decades.
Just to point out to Nick, it was actually described to all of us that VATSIM runs like a corporation, not an organisation. So you weren't wrong in saying that. It was endorsed by the board, and that's the way that it was conveyed to us as of recent too. So you're not wrong by making that assumption or making that statement.
Alright, so we'll move on to the next one, which is non-executive members of the board. So I guess the context for this is that aside from the division director, the rest of the board, they're all portfolio directors. They've got a bit that they look after. And that's what we see on a day-to-day basis. You know, clearly Dan, his remit is to make sure that our ATC training system is a good one, and that people get trained up without too much delay, and that they reach a particular standard. But it's being on the board, you obviously have a dual role, and that second role is to also keep in mind how the entire organisation is going, and certainly, you know, if we're going to give the certain responsibilities to the board, which obviously we have in the past, they have to be across the issues to be able to make those decisions. And normally that's not so much of an issue, but we do have certain points in time where we have a crisis of some sort. A lot of these aren't necessarily made public. They're normally things that get resolved fairly quickly. But it does mean that you're calling in these people. They're busy enough with their lives as it is. They're also contributing their time to run operations or IT or events or ATC training, and now they've got to think about this extra thing as well. So the idea, one of the reasons that I put this in here is to give the board a couple of extra people who can support the board in that time. They can be doing a lot of the deeper thinking about how to resolve those issues, but also to provide to the board. We want to bring in people into these positions who have a bit of experience in the organisation, and they know what works and doesn't. And particularly if you have a board who's fairly inexperienced, they can provide a bit of wisdom. So were there any comments on that one?
Can I just ask a question on that one? Is there anywhere written down that a deputy director or a director has to spend so much time involved in doing something online, or can they just show up whenever they want?
Yeah. Normally when you apply to become a director, there'll normally be an hour requirement of, I think it's about 10 hours per month.
Okay.
And that's on the network.
And who's ultimately there to hold them responsible for maintaining an online presence? I know that there's current and past directors that haven't maintained that online hourly, or not even online hourly, but any sort of presence within the community. I'm just curious to know, and obviously, I don't think it should be shone in public light, but definitely, for us, the people that are being affected by the lack of commitment, who's there to hold them accountable, and how do we hold the person that's holding them accountable for doing that?
So ultimately, that would be the division director and or the board.
I know that certainly in the past, in my tenure as division director, I was not known, but I do recall taking certain decisions against fellow board members with regard to their amount of online presence. Unfortunately, in the most famous case, that person moved on to another role before I could do anything about him. But that's all ancient history. So yeah, it is the division director's responsibility, and for the division director's online presence and administration of their role, it falls to the regional director to keep an eye on that guy.
But at the end of the day, what I'm sort of getting at is, for example, there's members of the board, prior and present, that have not met those hour requirements, but nothing's been done about that, and it's been vocal. I've been very vocal around that. But who is there to hold the division? Are we as the community there, or do we just shut our mouths and just keep doing what we do every day? That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not so much, okay, there's a staff member accountable for this person, but obviously, that the division director is not holding certain people accountable. I'm not saying you haven't, David, but prior division directors, who is to keep the division director accountable for making sure that they're is it the community or is it back on them?
Well, I certainly think the community has a role to play in all of this. There's certainly people who formally have that responsibility. And as you mention it, as you point out, that always hasn't been done. And I certainly think where things don't happen, the community's well entitled to have their voices heard.
Without fear of repercussions.
I mean, some of the staff members, deputy directors, etc., they've been quite long serving, yet their hours might not be very high.
Yeah, look, you've got to be a little bit careful with, mandating strict numbers of hours on the network. There's always an element of give and take. As always, everybody's a volunteer with their time, and everybody should be afforded the opportunity to enjoy their hobby as well as work for their hobby. So there's always been a degree of give or take with the amount of hours someone may spend actually connected to the network as a call sign, as a pilot or a controller or a supervisor or whatever. To do with also the amount of hours they spend conducting their role as well. There's a fair amount of leniency given when someone's working hard in the background and may not spend quite so much time online on the network.
Yeah, so I guess there's really two objectives behind those hours. One is to, hopefully if someone's going to be put in a fairly important role, they're actually going to be around to fulfill those duties. You certainly don't want someone hogging a seat and not actually using, not actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, and not giving someone else the opportunity to do that. And I guess the other objective is that you actually want people to come online and actually understand what's actually happening on the network. But as Greg says, a lot of the guys, particularly at the board level, are fairly busy real world, and it can be pretty difficult for them to meet the hours sometimes.
Yeah, for what it's worth, to me, I mean, I don't honestly care too much, like how many hours someone actually spends on the network itself, whether it be controlling or observing or supping or whatever. It seems kind of secondary to me, when what I would actually be worried about is whether, board members or other staff members are at least accessible enough to give you the time of day when you get in touch or bring an issue to their attention. And of course, it doesn't mean having a complete response straight away, but having people who feel approachable would be far more valuable to me than someone who ticks a box and has X amount of hours on the network. That, to me, it's like, obviously you need a little bit, but I think that should purely be discretionary down to their colleagues, and I couldn't otherwise care very much at all myself.
Exactly, I agree 100%.
Yeah, so do I. There is a certain degree of conducting the role that you're conducting that requires that you spend time engaged with the community. So, for example, the director of ATC training needs to spend a certain amount of time actually controlling. The director of events needs to spend a certain amount of time participating in their events. And more so, and more generally, the more that these senior staff members are seen online, conducting and partaking in their hobby, the more approachable they seem to the membership.
Yep, 100%.
100%.
Hey all.
Having said that, mandating a certain number of hours has always been more of a guideline than an actual rule, to quote Captain Barbosa.
He's not wrong either.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on. So 3.2.3, there's a bit of a paragraph there on conflict of interest. It generally hasn't been a big problem with what we do. The only time this really raises its head is when Worldflight comes along and the guy in charge of operations or events happens to also be out at Worldflight HQ. So in the past, we've simply picked another person to represent Vatpac in that instance. So we're not really proposing anything to change in that respect here. Any comments? Alright, appointment committees. Again, this is no change. This is simply going to be a formalisation of everything that we've been doing for however long. The only real change here is that the DCRM, not sure how that's been appointed in the past, but what we're proposing here is that the DCRM, who under the COR is supposed to be appointed by the Division Director, so we're proposing that the DCRM is also selected by an appointment committee. Any comments?
Nah, makes sense. So the only comment I could make is that the DCRM could also be appointed by a vote of the board, but same difference.
Yep, and so it's made clear there in what I've put under that heading that the committee only makes a recommendation to the board, and the board makes the final appointment. So certainly if the board wanted to have an extra step of scrutiny after the committee makes its recommendation, it's certainly entitled to do so. We've got to wait for Shannon to retire before any of that gets triggered anyway.
Yeah, he's been there a while. For those that are present that are not familiar with Shannon's work, yes, he's been there a while and he has been the DCRM for as long as I can remember. But to this day, he still does an exceptional job in that role. So, his role is somewhat kept in the background, but just rest assured that he's not filling a seat. He actually works quite hard in that role.
It's good that you got someone who, despite not being very active in the community, there's someone that's going to be impartial in the affairs, because I don't really know people well enough to make a judgment on them previously. So I think having someone impartial like that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Did someone just change my tag to an S2? I've gone from an S3 to an S2 suddenly.
Moving on, review committees. So there's a couple of policies that we have, policies and procedures that we have where there's an appeal process. So all of you who have got controller ratings, you might remember from the email that you get with the results of your assessment, it sort of lists an appeal process there. So what we're suggesting here is that that we harmonise all of the review processes amongst all of the policies and procedures, so that the review goes, possibly to the portfolio director, but then thereafter to the board. And if the board feels the need to, we have written down a set of procedures to appoint a decision review committee, and the board can activate that when they feel necessary. And so the idea would be that that decision review committee would have the same sort of representative members as we have for an appointment committee.
I definitely think that's a good idea. Seems as though in the near past we've had the issue of there being no appeal process within the division, and that the appeal has to go to the regional director because Vatpac 1 has stepped in straight away without anyone being able to deal with the situation and having the call straight off the bat.
Yep. Yep, so that would be a good instance where we would probably appoint a committee. Any other comments? Alright, moving on to participation by the membership in our decision-making processes. So town hall meetings. We ran the first one back in 2010 when Shannon was division director. We've run them, I think, probably more frequently in the past couple of years. And I'm just conscious that we're going to move through this quickly so we can actually get to the question and answer bit. But we just wanted to formalise in here that we're going to run one at least once a year. But as I said earlier this evening, that the intention is to probably run them twice a year. Any comments on that one? All right, public consultation. So this one's new to an extent. So this will formalise the process whereby when changes to policies are made, that we invite comments from relevant stakeholders. You know, if we're going to have a Teamspeak policy and we want to change that, then obviously that will just go out to the general membership. You know, if we're talking about the VA policy, that might go to the general membership, but also directly to you know, managers of our affiliated virtual airlines, and that we'd have a process that the portfolio director who's sponsoring that policy change has to provide evidence of that consultation to the board prior to the board considering that policy change. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I just have a comment on that. When you say general membership, do you mean that the general populace of the Vatpac community, or is there any specific sort of like a group when you say general membership?
Yep, so essentially it would be a, you know, like a post on the forums that everyone can see, everyone in Vatpac can see, and you know, they can send through some comments through to the portfolio director.
Yep, and will these comments be considered for future policy updates?
They would be made a board document effectively, so it'd have to be tabled before the board when considering that policy, and if we're looking in the context of future amendments beyond that, certainly the board could consult those at that point in time.
Alright, thank you, David.
Anyone else? Transparency, so nothing new here. This was one of Greg's initiatives, I think, that we start publishing our minutes of our official board meetings. So the only thing that we're looking to do here is to formalise that in our governance policy. If there's no comments on that one, 3.4.1 order of precedence. So once upon a time we had a deputy division director who would step in when the division director was unavailable. So since we abolished that, we've been, or we should have been, maintaining an order of precedence for succession. So we'll just formalise that process. That's not really so much good governance as just good planning for things that you don't expect to happen. You don't want people scrambling around trying to work out what's supposed to be happening when someone disappears. Deputy portfolio directors, so again, nothing new here. The only thing that we want to formalise is that portfolio directors are to submit their nominees to the board, just so the board can have a think about whether that's going to be the right person for the position prior to the portfolio director appointing that person. Any comments on that one? All right. Any comments on all of this in general before we wrap it up? All right. If there's no further comments, we'll close that item then. So we're going to go away and draft a governance policy, and we'll put that draft on the forum so that everyone can have a look and provide any further comments. And in terms of time frame, probably looking at sometime possibly first thing after World Flight, really. So, alright, we'll move on to the Q&A bit. So the first question that I've gotten from Liesl is, are there any plans to develop policy or training on the use of pre-departure clearances? I don't think we have any formal plans at this point, but wouldn't mind getting some general thoughts, Greg and Dan.
I think there was a small section on that in the senior controller course, wasn't it?
Yeah, there it is.
There's always one of those things that was in the senior controller course because it didn't really fit anywhere else, but due to the the VATSIM competencies associated with the other ratings. But it's certainly something that needs to be learned prior to senior controller, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's in the ARP somewhere as well. I'm just trying to find it.
I think it should be learnt at tower level, to be quite honest with you. I mean, what's the point? What's the point of getting to en route controller and not knowing about PDC?
Oh, I understand completely. I guess there's also the concept that the tools to be used for delivering PDC are not very well standardised either. Hopefully, Jake's new controller client might be able to address some of those concerns, but as always, we don't know how far off that is.
I think the division's really been waiting for the last maybe 10 years, waiting for the technology to come out before we put in some formal procedures and let it sort of run informally until then. And it just hasn't happened.
Yeah, that's right. The possibility is there to do so. The controllers are free to do so. Pilots are free to receive them. As far as a policy to actually formalise its use, I'm not sure the technical capability supports such a policy.
Yeah, so certainly it could be done through text messages or whatnot. It's not necessarily a very authentic way of doing it, but obviously it can certainly be done. And yeah, so I guess we were waiting for the more authentic methods to become available, and as of now, that still hasn't come about. All right, we'll move on. Next question.
Just gonna cut you off there, David. But just have a little thing about the PDC implementation of a formal procedure for instructions of PDCs.
Sorry, I didn't follow your question there.
Yeah, so just have a little comment about the implementation of instructions for a PDC, if that were to go through.
Go ahead.
So, I'm assuming a new document will be drafted in order to include the instructions for drafting. Not drafting. I mean, creating a PDC and then for the pilot to read back. Is that correct?
I think we're just discussing that it's not our plan at the moment to draft a formal policy for the delivery of PDC. PDCs are covered in the real-world documentation. There is a rudimentary method that controllers may optionally follow to deliver PDCs. And until the technology catches up and allows us to formalise a strict method, I think we're happy at this time to allow PDCs to occur informally.
Alrighty. If this PDC thing were to actually go through, what would be an estimate for the time frame to develop a modification to the current documents supporting correction around PDCs? As in, is there an estimate to how long the instructions would be taken to be documented?
The instructions are already documented for the current rudimentary methods. In terms of a time frame for a formalised document, we don't have one because we don't have any plans to create a formalised document.
Alright. Thanks, Greg, for that.
All right, thanks, William. Who wants to take us to the next question?
Ryan is here now as well, so you can ask him questions too.
I'm surprised Ryan hasn't asked questions already.
I'd just like to ask a question to the board in particular. In the recent light of what's gone on in terms of behaviour, Discord, and relevant issues that have happened that have caused obviously a lot of mental health issues towards members and whatnot. What are the board doing to take steps to sort of stop that, or inherently stop any or facilitate? I had the question in my head and I've just gone blank. But what are the board doing to basically address the issues that have come up, and when are we expected to hear what you guys are going to do in terms of putting policies in place or methods in place to stop that from happening again?
Yep, so something that's been a big problem for me is that we've really been kept in the dark about what actually happened and what the outcomes of. So there was an investigation done at the BAG level. So we've been kept in the dark as to what the findings of that investigation were and what the consequences of that investigation were. So really, we've not really got much to go on really, and to me, coming into this role at the time I did, clearly that's something that I wanted to try and address straight away. but we've been given, I was given no information at the time, and I've been told now that the investigation's been completed, but beyond that, no one's able to give me any information as to what was involved in the investigation so that I can do anything about it.
Okay, more to the question, obviously you must be aware of the incidences that did happen on Discord, and some of the allegations or some of the issues that have taken place. And my question is, what will Vatpac do to sort of negate that from happening again? If you have planned for any sort of negation or policy. I mean, in terms of holding staff accountable for their actions, as well as holding, obviously, you know, there's been a precedent set for as long as I can remember that Vatpac staff have been untouchable in terms of holding them accountable for their actions. And I think in saying that, it's a direct representation that it still continues to be that way. I mean, there's been some interesting activities happening over the last couple of months where Vatpac staff have not been held accountable. There seems to be this invincible shield on top of them. And what I'm sort of asking is, knowing that, what will the board do to ensure that that doesn't happen again, or negate that from happening again?
Yeah, so look, as I say, I don't actually know the specifics of what happened, but I'll try and answer your question in broad strokes anyway. So clearly there's, as we've discussed earlier this evening, clearly we've failed in terms of moderating some of these channels that we have. So that needs to be improved. And, you know, whether the policy needs to be reviewed, perhaps, but certainly actually getting out there and applying that Teamspeak Discord policy is certainly something that needs to be improved on. And, you know, the message from the board really is that, you know, if you're a staff member and you see something that's not right, then you need to do something, or at least report it so that someone else can do something about it. In terms of staff doing the wrong thing, anyone who's been on the staff before is aware that there's an internal expectations of staff, and so we expect a certain standard of behaviour from our staff, and part of that includes how they conduct themselves publicly, and, you know, if there's allegations that staff members are acting inappropriately, then we need to hear about that at the board level and, you know, at the division director level, so that can be addressed. But there's a clear expectation that staff, you know, hold themselves to a fairly high standard of behaviour in public. You know, so that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, if you're having a bit of banter with the guys on TeamSpeak and you let out a swear word, that's going to be the end of the world. But certainly, you know, we don't expect our staff members to be going around, you know, running amok, basically.
Just out of curiosity, David, there's been a lot of reference back to the staff expectations policy that's obviously been published, but there's no visibility for the general public to make that visible to, like, I don't know what the staff expectations policy entails, and I was just wondering if that's able to be made public, so that, you know, for a little bit of transparency for us, that, you know, you refer back to in the new policy that you want to put in place. I think it might be vital for us to be able to see this staff expectations policy, so that we can hold, or we know what the standard expectations are of staff.
So the part that talks about, you know, staff behaviour in public, I think doesn't really need to be, like, what it has in there is pretty broad. It's no different to, you know, what an ordinary person would expect out of someone who's supposed to be representing an organisation. You know, so I think everyone in here would have their own view of the standard of behaviour that might be expected of a staff member, and if you're seeing that a particular staff member is not living up to that, then you're certainly welcome to bring it to my attention, or bring it to the attention of that person's portfolio director.
But isn't that also for every user's got to be the same principle so that everyone is on the same page?
Yeah, look, so the expectations of staff, it doesn't set a clear bar, right? It's basically saying, there's you're basically expected to follow the rules, and if you're not following the rules, clearly there's a problem. Same as anyone else, but even more so if you're a staff member.
Yeah, I think the problem in the past has been, or at least in the recent past, has been that the application of the policy has been somewhat lacking. The policy itself basically talks about the same rules that everyone else follows, but however makes many references to the fact that staff should be held to a higher standard than that of the general membership of VATSIM, not just Vatpac, but as VATSIM. So, I personally don't have an objection to publishing the key components of that policy. I mean, it's in the format of a forum post from the then division director, talking about recent events that happened 8 years ago, because that's how old the post is. So that it would need to be edited and those references removed. But I certainly don't see a need to keep those dot points private. And in fact, there's nothing in there that wouldn't be expected already. There's no surprises.
So when that was written, there was certainly a couple of staff members who weren't clear about what expectations might be placed on a staff member. But what's on there, is pretty standard.
Why don't we, in response to the question in the town hall meeting, David put it on the agenda for the next board meeting to discuss whether or not that policy could become a public policy.
Yep, agreed. All right, who wants to give us the next question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Greg?
If a banana eats another banana, is that banana cannibalism?
You're bloody terrible, mate.
Yes. I'd say yeah.
No wonder we're shipping you off to another state.
Oh, thanks, Morris. Gave me a laugh.
Sorry, David. Just for clarification.
Oh no, the previous question's still going.
No. This is a different question. Just for clarification, at least for the last couple of weeks, we've had some interesting comments made by the board in relation to the way that VATSIM runs. Obviously, I'm fully aware how the VATSIM structure works, but in terms of running it from a division's perspective, and I sort of, when someone makes a statement, you sort of take it on board that that's endorsed by the board. But from the perspective of the board, what sort of way are you intending to run the board? Are you intending it to run more of like a democracy as opposed to X serves at the pleasure of X and X serves at the pleasure of X? Are we sort of running away from that outdated sort of formality and creating more of a democracy for the membership to be heard? Or what's your perspective, or what's the board's perspective on that moving forward?
You called them the Gestapo, didn't you, Paul?
That's what the governance document is, isn't it?
Yep. So that discussion paper pretty well spells out the way we intend it to operate, and certainly from Certainly from my point of view, and I think many past and present board members would agree with this. You know, we're not here to make some founder happy. We're here to make the community happy. You know, that's literally why we're here. You know, we're not getting paid by some founder to do this role. We wouldn't be doing it if we weren't doing it for the community.
Just to add, I know that someone made a comment about that's what the governance document is about. It's just more for clarification, because not only, you know, a week ago, you know, we're getting hurled, you know, we're getting comments as, you know, about how this is how VATSIM runs, and you know, you can refer back to the forum posts about that, but it was just more of a clarification. You know, it's all well and good to put something on paper, but then to hear it in black and white is sort of the clarification I was looking for, so thank you.
Yeah, so there's sort of two, there's a dichotomy there, right? So there's obviously formally what the COR, Code of Regulation, sets out, and then there's sort of what we've actually been doing, you know, for the last 20 years in practice.
I can't think of any.
So if I could just provide some additional perspective, is that I don't personally buy into the serves at the pleasure of statement. The Code of Regulation spells out who appoints who, and goes to great lengths to also spell out that the appointer does not interfere with the appointee's role. So by David putting this information into a document that he's tabled tonight, that basically goes to demonstrate to the membership of the division that his way of operating and his way that he hopes future division directors will operate is via a certain set of rules. And that, as we said earlier, is how previous division directors have operated, not at all times, but hopefully such a policy can protect us against those times. For example, the regional director has every right to step in and tell the division director to bugger off and appoint someone else. But under our community expectations, I guess the expectations of our community are that that would not happen on a regular basis, simply so that the founders that David so eloquently put can try and interfere with what's going on at the lower levels, and by making you guys, the membership, happy, we would hopefully be achieving those objectives with regard to the expectations of the founders anyway. So it's all working to the same goal.
Yep.
User joined your channel.
Any further questions?
Have we talked about the ATC training department yet?
Yeah, that was meant
Yeah,
to
you missed it,
about
Ryan.
You're
like
about 2 hours
25 minutes
behind.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
User disconnected from your channel.
Say, I've got a question. Ryan, is there anything that you personally would like to say about the ATC training department?
Well,
Funny you should ask.
This
I
is
wanna-
the time to suck up.
I just want to say that the resources that we provide from the training department to help students train is all up to date and current. We're making a lot of changes to the assessment scenarios. So there's a new tower assessment in the works based at Sydney, so there'll be two assessments, Sydney and Melbourne.
Sorry, why is that, Ryan?
Why is that?
Yeah.
The current Melbourne Tower scenario was made back in 2008, and
on ASRC.
And so, yeah, that's right. And updates to it is not necessary because the Melbourne Tower assessment, big bang. The Melbourne Tower assessment is up to date with all the EREC status. However, what our goal is when we put a student on, let's say, Sydney Tower assessment, and then they are unable to be deemed competent at least 2 or more times, they'll then get assessed in a different place, which will be Melbourne, and then therefore that they're not expecting the exact same scenario again, which allows us more room for producing an efficient and quality student.
Well, that wouldn't produce an efficient and quality student in any way, shape or form.
And why is that?
I'll tell you why. Because every airport is different. And as a lot of members on this forum would know, you go to as a basic training method, you get taught the basics of air traffic control, i.e. Whether it be tower approach, which is across the board, and then should you want to control in Melbourne, I know the resources are very limited, but if you want to get somebody who's really competent, then via Teamspeak, you sit with that person for X number of times, he listens to you, control, and then he gives you well, for want of a better word, a rating, and then should you want to go to Sydney, same story.
All of our mentoring is in Melbourne, so every student that does their training for Melbourne is all trained in Melbourne, and then the assessment is in Melbourne. But if we start the assessments off with Sydney, they are required to know the documents and all that for Sydney.
Yeah, I know, that's right. So that means if the student goes through and does fine with Melbourne, doesn't mean he can necessarily control with Sydney, because Sydney's got a whole different set of standards and stuff like that, local procedures, I guess you could call it. So therefore, I reckon basically the board the training department should incorporate where you got a person who's proficient at Sydney, sits with an up-and-coming student who wants to control in Sydney and sits there for them. You don't have to be that thorough, but as long as you've got the basics, 2 or 3 days, whatever it takes, and so right, now you can control in Sydney, and you can annotate it however you want to on that person's file or whatever, so it gives you a better outcome.
Right, so what you're saying, you want an endorsement for Sydney?
Exactly. Now, I don't know, I don't know how complicated that could end up getting, but that would be the process, I would imagine.
It's not complicated, but it's not required.
Well, wouldn't the mentoring system help with that? So you had a mentor for you so long before you actually can go out on your own, so therefore you can get that up to proficiency for that particular area a lot faster, with a mentor being able to talk to you about how you went over that period.
Yeah, exactly. In the real world, they're called training officers. So in the real world, you go out, you go to Melbourne, you train up, you do whatever, then you go out in the field and you sit with the person who's your training officer, and he sits with you, and until you reach a certain degree of proficiency, and then says, right, now you can control on your own. You've got what they call your rating.
Right, in the real world, you say. This is
I'm not
Vatpac.
saying
We don't have any time to do that.
Obviously it's not that. We don't have the resources.
I think, Nick, what you're trying to refer to, it's under the GRP, and unfortunately, we're really restricted by VATSIM's policies. But we can't restrict someone that has a controller rating to an airport unless it's designated as a major airport by the region, I assume, or by the division put forth to the region. So unless I know that it has been discussed and has been discussed for years and years and years whether to make Sydney a major airport and have those endorsements like Heathrow and Dubai and all the relevant major airports. But that's the only way to provide a restriction on somebody that has a controller rating to control it at a specified airport.
Yeah. Previously, I think it was just before Tracy left as the division director, we did, as I assume practically every board has, look at making Sydney a major aerodrome. It's just not practical. We have over 100 people who have already gone through ATC training. To have them, some of them who might be C1s, C3s, to go back and do an endorsement just for Sydney, it's just not practical. However, we do partially train people to operate at Sydney. During TMA mentoring, you are most likely, well, you should be, venturing to Sydney for a session just to get a grasp on the local operations at Sydney.
Yeah, I know. I understand that, Harrison. I guess I'm not asking you to sort of go back through everybody who's got the C1s or whatever go, but I'm saying have this as future sort of a training stream.
You can't.
Yeah, it's not possible.
You can't, because VATSIM says you must designate Sydney as a major airport to be able to do that. And as I think it was Harrison said, every board that I'm aware of in the past 10-15 years has asked the same question: should Sydney be designated a major airport? And on each visit to that question, the answer has come back as no. It's just not different enough to our other airports. The only unique feature of Sydney Airport to every other airport in Australia is its parallel runways, and soon to be not so unique, it would seem. And
vectors to final.
Well, that's the vectors to final are mandated by the fact that there's parallel runways that are close together. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, vectors to final are taught as part of our standard ATC training system. So that it's not really the answer that's always come back is that Sydney is really not that different from other airports in Australia in terms of its standards. As you say, yes, its local procedures are different to Melbourne's, but Melbourne's local procedures are different to Adelaide's, are different to Brisbane's, and so on. But the notion that Sydney should become a major airport has just never been, has never really got over the line. What the training department is trying to do, and I've been out of the loop for a little while, so I'm coming from outside here. But I know that in the distant past, that one of the major issues that the training department has faced with our Melbourne tower assessment scenario is that we assess a student at Melbourne, give them their rating because they are deemed competent on that assessment and other things. There are more than just the practical that comes into the decision. And within 5 minutes, they're logged on at Sydney. So I applaud the efforts of the training department to produce or to incorporate Sydney into their training, because I think it better prepares our students for what they are inevitably going to do the moment they get their rating.
But why Melbourne out of all the airports is?
Melbourne was chosen, as Ryan said, 10 years ago, to be the place where the assessment scenario took place. That was from that decision came from a need to separate training activities. So the Melbourne, the tower scenario was based on Melbourne. The TMA scenario was based on Adelaide, so on and so forth. So that you had, and the mentoring scenarios themselves are on other areas, and that best served the broader division rather than just focusing on one or two airports.
But what's to say in terms of obviously sophistication and probably alleviating the issues that we're currently having on the network with controllers being inexperienced and controlling a certain aerodrome? Why not train and assess on a more sophisticated airport like Sydney as opposed to something like Melbourne.
User disconnected from your channel.
Yeah, that's what the training departments are suggesting that they're going to be doing, is producing an assessment scenario that's based in Sydney. I know there's been a recent mentoring scenario produced based on Brisbane, and hang on, lost my train of thought.
Well, while you regain your train of thought, and interrupt me when you do, Greg, but I mean, I'm amazed at the fact that all that you're saying, or somebody said, maybe it was you, I'm not sure, but all the airports are really all very much the same. Well, nothing could be further than the truth, because in Melbourne you've got LASOs, in Sydney you've got parallel runway ops, and in Brisbane, well, you've got all sorts of shit happening up there with the runways crossing. And so it's a whole different sort of set of mindset when you're dealing with those three airports.
Yeah, I think also one of the...
The specifics are different, but the basics are the same. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
The competencies are the same. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, my train of thought has come back. The only point where a controller is deemed competent as a controller is when they receive that C1 rating. That's what the C stands for, is controller. The S in all the other ratings stands for student. So when you get your S2 rating, you are still a student. So don't expect that student to be competent as a controller.
Well, there you go. You learn something every day.
I think also something we need to look at is it can't be expected of the ATC training team to take someone to every single airport in Australia, make sure they know the procedures. We have the local instructions for that. Before you go hop on and control at Brisbane, it is an expectation that you would have had at least a glance over the local instructions to make sure you know the procedures.
Well, that's the expectation.
That's actually in the code of conduct.
Yep, that's the expectation, and I'm not going to name names, but I know a particular controller who's a C1 now, and he has trouble interpreting, understanding Avalon procedures.
Well, can I just say,
I
whenever
have
you
trouble
go
interpreting Avalon procedures.
You know, like he asked me about Avalon procedure and all that, and Essendon and all that, and I went, well, it's basically in the TMA, and his answer to me was, really?
Can I just say, there is a standard, not for all aerodromes, because you just can't have everyone go to their next rating if they've only controlled at all aerodromes, but we do have a policy where if you go into your S3 rating, you have to control at one or three or more aerodromes or whatever it is, or if you've gone from S3 to C1, you have to do more than 50 hours, so there are small requirements, but you're not expected to control at every airport.
Just another thing, bringing back to what Nick was saying as well, and this is more open to everybody. Every time we have an issue with a controller, we're always requested to provide controller feedback. And I know quite some time ago when I was on the board, there was discussion that the global ratings policy, GRP, was being reviewed to, the suggestions being made about, controller feedback and providing further training before logging onto the network. I find that, and this is maybe something that can be brought up at a regional level as well, but my main concern is providing feedback does nothing. It's basically just a way to vent to the training department to say, hey, I've had this experience, but the training department can't enforce any sort of further training. Is there any sort of push from the board or the training department to push on the regional director or the executive committee to push again on having that review?
Can I just quickly say, before I have to go, all the feedback right now that gets sent to Director of ATC Training is also viewed by me, and then I'm going around to other people whilst they're controlling and observing them, and if they're making errors whilst controlling, I'm bringing the errors up with them and telling them what they've done wrong and what can they improve on for the future.
Yeah.
But in
That's
saying that,
that's all
that's been dealt with forever and a day.
Yeah, but in saying that doesn't give any indication that someone may be competent at one stage in their controlling career. But then again, that's not stopping somebody, that that is incompetent from logging onto the network and providing a horrible service. And what I'm trying to get at is, is there any push via the ATC department or the board back onto the executive committee to ensure that gets looked at again?
There is something that's currently in the talks with members of the executive committee and members of other divisions, including Vatpac, which we are in consultation with currently. So watch this space. Something interesting could come up very, very soon.
In the matter of transparency, I was just wondering if you could enlighten us of what's being discussed, as it obviously directly affects us as the membership.
You may not be able.
Your channel timed out.
Yeah. So we've only really started that process, and once we have more details, and obviously we're looking to implement those, we'll provide more details at that point in time.
I definitely think that discussion would include, mainly controllers that have been away from it for an extended period of time, coming back and controlling, and just having no idea.
That's basically the crux of what we're looking at the moment.
Our issue isn't so much the S2 that's coming out, making a mistake here and there. There's people who achieved their rating 10 years ago and haven't controlled since, and just being able to log straight back onto the network by right.
Yep.
Those people, sorry David, those people who are absent from the network for 10 years and log on to control a particular location without first reviewing the local procedures and maybe observing or studying the traffic in that area are in breach of the Code of Conduct C1. And they should be reported to a supervisor.
No, that's right. You should, even if you are coming back, you should be doing keeping yourself up to date with the current procedures and everything. And even if you get in and listen to other controllers before you even start again.
Yeah. It's not Vatpac's place to be enforcing the Code of Conduct. It's VATSIM's place to be enforcing the Code of Conduct.
Yep, and certainly for anyone who has come back from an extended absence, those people are certainly welcome to get in touch with the ATC training team, and asking for a bit of a refresher.
Oh, that sounds good.
Just quickly on the control training or whatever, but with the TMAs. Just out of curiosity, Sydney's still running jet departures at 5,000 and non-jets at 3,000? Because the TMA's not showing anything with regards to
right
that
to me.
for Sydney. And that's where the confusion comes in with a lot of the juniors.
Sorry, was that a question in regards to the Sydney local instructions?
Yeah, the current TMA we've got...
User joined your channel.
I was trying to remember, I'm pretty confident that it was still 3,000, 5,000 for Sydney, but I couldn't see any information related to that, where the other TMAs for Brisbane and Melbourne showed the initial altitudes.
Can I ask a directed question?
Yeah, just
yep, sorry.
Go on with another question. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, so we'll look into that, but they should be in there. Go ahead, Ethan.
So, with that being said, yes, okay, there's the local instructions where I'll admit, when I first came on, I was excited getting the S2 and had a quick glance and went controlled. But then it was the S3s, the C1s that were sitting above me that would say, hey, no, you've done that wrong. This is how you're supposed to do it, which helped in a long way. But going to that Sydney airport where you've got the 5,000 for jets, 3,000 for prop, is there some sort of code that you can put into Euroscope to stop them from going above their initial assigned altitude?
No. And there's nothing in real world that can do that either.
Okay.
Well, it's another plane above them.
that works pretty well.
No, but even for like S2 controller giving their initial and then they try to give a prop aircraft a 5,000 initial, instead of it being able to go to 5,000, it can only go to 3,000 on their screen.
Yeah, no, it's
No.
not technically possible in our simulated environment or the real world environment.
Okay.
Yeah. If anything, in that situation, you would just inform the tower controller, and you don't want to be rude about it because that's not how you go about things. But just say, hey, it's 3,000, and people are only going to learn by someone telling them. They're not just going to magically wake up one day and go, oh, it's 3,000 at Sydney for props.
And by the way, I'll put the reference to the local instructions in the Room 1 chat down there if anybody's looking for it.
Yeah, sorry, I had my eyes shut. I thought it was up somewhere higher.
Yep, we've got another question. This, I guess, is for ATC training. What is... Well, let me paraphrase this, but what is the expected length of time to complete training? What would be the maximum time before requesting a new instructor?
Well, this one comes up all the time because we get a lot of emails about it. But it really depends on how we're going with everything. Like right now, we're pretty bogged down. We have been for a while, and I get the feeling that I know the person who sent in that question, and I know yours has been in there for a very long time. But if you feel like, I mean, we're all volunteers, so we all have stuff to do outside of Vatpac. But if you feel that you're not really getting anywhere with the mentor that you currently have or the instructor that you currently have in terms of availability, then you can email training@vatpac.org and he'll set you up with someone else.
Is there an escalation process above? Obviously, if we have issues with that, because I know there was some rather heated discussion on the unofficial Discord about ATC training and the lack of communication, the constant reorganising of training sessions and assessments and whatnot. If someone is upset, is the escalation process straight to the division director, or is there some other sort of process? Or maybe it's not for me, but obviously maybe some clarification for the people in the room or listening to this later to understand that there is another alternate if they're not getting the appropriate response from that director.
Yep. So so obviously a student would be dealing with the mentor and instructor at that point in time, and if they're not getting anywhere with it, then first port of call would be to the ATC training director.
Then division director, so on and so forth.
Yep.
I think that we're trying our best to get through everyone. I know that a lot of the guys are pretty busy right now. It's coming up to exam time, and I am very sorry if you've been waiting a very long time. I know that there are some people who have been in there for a very long time. But if you do have a problem, then let us know. I know that I have been one of the instigators in terms of constantly rescheduling, but yeah, if you do have problems, then let us know and we'll try and get you sorted out. But also know that you're not the only one who has been in there for a very long time. But now that we've got
I'm sorry, but just quickly on that, I don't think that's a very adequate response to say that you apologise for people being in there a long time. I mean, Daniel, you're responsible for that department, and at the end of the day, you're accountable for that department. And to say that you're sorry that people have commitments and whatnot, and that you're sorry for people to be there, a long time, I don't think that's a very appropriate response to have. And some of the responses that you've made tonight isn't really appropriate either. I mean, at the end of the day, this is your portfolio and your responsibility, and you're letting the community down, unfortunately. And I think you need to take accountability for that.
What can we define what a long time is?
That is also a very interesting thing, because I've heard a few complaints being put through, and some things aren't being unheard of, aren't being addressed. And I mean, we've given the appropriate details for escalation, but it just seems to get nowhere.
David, that one's for you.
Yeah, well, certainly, if you're not getting anywhere with the portfolio director, then certainly you're welcome to put it past my office.
And I think that's why I brought up in relation to obviously making commitment to a certain portfolio and maintaining an online presence, especially with people that hold such a valued part. I mean, the ATC director of ATC training is one of the most crucial parts to a division in terms of influencing controllers and pilots to be on the network. I mean, if you don't have controllers, then you don't have the traffic. So, and at the moment, that's one of the biggest downfalls to the community is that we don't have that. And I think getting responses like that above, I think it needs to be addressed and assessed to see whether that's an appropriate response to have. Considering there's more than
you have a problem with me, is what you're saying.
Yep. Well, Paul, look, we can certainly look into our staffing levels in our ATC training team. I don't think you can.
I'm not having. The problem isn't in terms with the person, it's just the response that's given to a question, and it's sort of like a big circle of the blame game. I think the people that are in control of that department need to take responsibility and not just apologise, but let's get a solution in place and let's move forward, because at the moment,
what else
and it has
am I meant to
been
do,
for quite
Paul,
some time,
in a volunteer organisation where everyone is trying their best? All I can do is apologise. I'm sorry that people have other things that need doing. We are legitimately doing our best with what we've been given. We've got a strong team now that is getting trained up so that we can get our wait times down.
Unfortunately,
so please don't say that we aren't doing anything to address the issues, because I'm doing my best. I'm young, I know, I'm not as educated as some of the others, but I am legitimately doing my best for what I think for the department. And I think that the way that we are going, we are trying to rectify the issues. So I think that you saying that nothing is being done is not appropriate. And I'm sorry for the outburst, but yeah.
I think it's more in relation to some of the comments that you've made about people that have been sitting there for quite some time, and about your lack of commitment to them. And I think this can be addressed in another forum, but it was just in relation to your response about a question that was raised.
Well,
apologising for not. So Paul, I think we've probably addressed your concern there. There is certainly action being taken in terms of expanding the team, and we'll look to continue doing that in the future. Obviously, we can't, as much as we'd probably like to, we can't bring on too many people at the same time, because we've got to train our own staff as well to be able to then go and train our controllers.
I've got a question about just inactivity on the VATSIM network.
Yep, sure.
So on VATSIM, I've read up that I think if you don't log on, or if you don't connect yourself with the VATSIM servers in a calendar quarter, then your CID gets suspended by the Vice President of Membership. Is that correct?
Yep, so that's purely an administrative thing, so that VATSIM can keep track of who's active and who isn't. If that does happen, all you've got to do is get in touch with the membership department on the VATSIM website, and they'll get your account reactivated pretty quickly.
Yep. So with that, and also in relation to the the people not being on the VATSIM network for like 10 years or so, with that, do their controller ratings decay over time, or do they somehow lose their controller ratings because of inactivity to the VATSIM network?
No, so everything remains the same. All that happens is a switch gets flipped to inactivate their account, and as soon as they come back, that switch gets flipped back.
Alright, so that just means that whenever the user whenever the user logs back into the VATSIM network, they should probably get some refreshments on the updated procedures. Is that correct?
So, as it stands at the moment, we leave it up to the individual how they do their refresher. Something that we obviously encourage a lot is self-learning. Certainly reduces the burden on the ATC training team. People can do that, but something that, as I mentioned before, is available to everyone is they're certainly welcome to get in touch with the ATC training team and do some refresher training. Something that Greg sent me a message to point out, obviously, so mentoring is not only available for students, but is also available for anyone who already has their rating. Whether it's a procedure that they're struggling to come to grips with, maybe it's LASO, maybe it's PDC, or whatever it might be, or maybe they need some help getting up to speed with a particular airport. They're certainly welcome to get in touch with ATC training to get some help.
Or in fact, ask in the ATC training forum.
Yep, and then we've had it in the past. It's not just the ATC training team that chimes in, but also, we've got a whole heap of fairly experienced guys who have a wealth of knowledge who can contribute to answering that question as well. So something that's been pointed out to me on text as well is that that access to mentoring for controllers that already have their rating isn't something that's well advertised, and that perhaps we could improve there. We'll certainly take that on board and see what we can do in that with that aspect.
So from what I'm receiving, Vatpac, not just Vatpac, but with mentoring in the VATSIM network, so anyone can utilize the mentoring service to just get some extra knowledge or just to get a second opinion on what they should do. Is that correct?
User disconnected from your channel.
Yep. So that email address that Dan posted a little bit earlier, training at Vatpac. You can, if you need some mentoring, you can send a request through there, or you can post a question up on the ATC forum.
Yep. All right. Thanks, David, for the answer.
No worries, mate.
Yeah.
User disconnected from your channel.
Creation of a Vatpac email address for staff members. I know
Yep.
there are a couple who still are yet to receive it, myself included. I don't remember who it was who instructed me on the forums to get in contact with IT at Vatpac or whatever the email is, which I did. So it was probably about maybe 2 to 4 weeks ago. Something like
Yeah,
that.
I'll take that one.
That'll
Sam.
probably be David.
We'll chase that one up.
Great, thanks very much.
Any other questions for the night?
Yeah, I just have another question. That,
Yep, sure.
It's more general about the pilot rating things. So, I've heard recently that there are going to be, I think, P6 to P8, I think, being in the works. Is there any status update on those?
User disconnected from your channel.
Are you talking about the ratings themselves, or the ratings being available for training?
So in relation to the VATOSH P3 and P5, and also the VATSIM P6 to P8. Yeah, both of those.
Okay.
Yep. So the pilot training's been run by the region, so I don't have an answer for that. Harrison, I don't know if if you want to say anything from the region.
Yeah, so currently Vadosh offers the P1 and P2. Recently, myself and Jacob, we got everything over to a new server. Vadosh in the near future will be offering a P3 course, and I know they definitely hope to offer P4 and P5 as soon as practicable.
I just want to add on to there were some
your
issues in terms of the previous server that we're on that were kind of slowing down the progress for Josh, but that was resolved, and yeah, so just want to let you guys know about that.
Alright, thanks guys for your answers to that question. I appreciate it.
No worries, mate.
Sorry, wasn't the question the P6 to P8 or something?
Yeah,
So to
that
add
team
on
currently
that,
don't have a P6 to P8. It goes from P5 and jumps to P9. But I don't have any information on what that team's doing in regard to that. I expect David doesn't. It's probably a question that we should feed up the chain.
Was that something to do with specializations? In other words, for virtual RAF and that type of thing, the individual different ones?
Could be.
There's
I'm just vaguely remembering something about that. I think the S9 was something to do with special operations with military aircraft.
Yeah, P9 is the pilot flight instructor course. It could, you could be right on that. It could be specific one. So the P1 to P5 covers everything from VATSIM basics up to advanced IFR pilot. So I think they're your main focus of your regional ATOs.
Yep. I know previously there was a virtual airline that was about to offer a P6, but unfortunately they no longer.
Yeah, what was the definition of a P6?
International and oceanic pilot.
There you go. Right.
I know definitely Vadosh, something we're currently looking into, is moving away from TeamViewer. Although it is good, there's a program that'll better suit Vadosh, which is definitely something to look forward to when you conduct your training.
Alright, any more questions?
Yeah, I've got one more question.
Yep, sure.
This is in regards to the official Vatpac Discord server, not the unofficial one, but the actual official one. What is the current state of it, and is there any consideration for the server to be reopened to the Vatpac populace?
So, it's most people are probably aware it is currently closed. There is currently a discussion that's being held internally about how we're going to resolve some of the issues that people have with Discord, and if we can get a resolution on those items, that certainly would consider bringing it back. But yeah, we'll have to let you know what we decide to do with that.
Alrighty, thanks for the answer for that. And also, is there going to be any time frame as to when the discussion about the Discord server will be finalized, and if the Discord server will be actually coming back online for the public?
No time frame as yet.
Okay, thank you, David, for that.
No worries.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that, we'd probably make an announcement about it anyway, once we decide which way to go. Any more questions?
I guess this is kind of just a wrap up type thing. In terms of the governance paper, now that you've had this town hall and I assume gotten at this point the majority of the feedback on that you are going to get, do you have an idea or like in terms of next steps of that? Will that be become an official policy at a next meeting, or what's kind of the next step for the governance paper?
Yep, so the dot points in there are all going to be translated into a policy. I'll put a draft up of that policy probably post World Flight, for a final round of comments on the actual text of that policy, and then we'll put that to the board to consider.
Thank you.
Any final questions?
Yeah, I've just got another question here. Is there any expected time frame as to when the board as to when the minutes for this will come up, and where are they going to come up?
The minutes for this town hall meeting, you mean?
Yes, that is affirmative, David. The minutes for this town hall meeting.
Yeah, so these town halls are meant to be a little bit, I guess, informal. So we're not going to publish minutes of it per se, but I think Sam's recording at the moment. So yeah, so this will get uploaded at some point.
Alright, and will this recording be publicly viewable by the public as well?
Yes, it has in the past anyway.
Okay, so, and I assume this is all to ensure transparency in terms of these meetings, is that correct?
Well, everyone's welcome to attend anyway.
Okay, and where can I find the recording for this, if it does get up, or if it does get uploaded?
It'll be on the Musical Aviator.
If you go to YouTube and search for Vatpac Town Hall, you'll find a bunch of them.
Alright, thank you guys for that.
Any more questions?
Wrap it up.
Yeah, that was my last question, Nick.
Yeah, so
wrap it up.
Yeah, if there's no more questions, as has been suggested now, we'll wrap this up. Thank you all for coming. All of your questions and your input certainly been helpful. And we'll do this all again in a couple of months.
Thanks guys, thanks David for your very helpful answers to my questions, and thank you guys for coming here. I appreciate being in this little town hall here, and I hope to see you guys in a little while.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks for the laugh, Greg.
Oh, you got here just in time, Cam.
Oh, g'day, Cam.